3, 2, 1. Welcome back to another episode of Digital Voices with Bo Tiffany. We talk about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, and talk about the issues of today. Every once in a while, I come across a really interesting guest, and we dig in a little bit, trying to find out who it is that they are, how they got to be who they are, and how they picked up the tools to become that person along their way throughout the course of their life. And today's special guest is someone that I'm excited to speak with, Mr. Coach Cam. And so with that said, I would like to put a big welcome out to Mr. Coach Cam for coming on Digital Voices. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, Bo, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. My
pleasure. My pleasure. Well, I was really excited to see a little bit of what you shared with me with our initial contact. You have kind of a long history. You've done a lot with yourself to the point where obviously you're coaching, and now you're doing courses on basically how to better your life, self-improvement. And in this day and age, I don't think there's enough of that. So I'm excited to hear about you and what we can figure out about you today. So tell me a little bit about your background. Where are you from? And tell us a little bit without digging in too much, because we'll get to that. What are you doing today? So obviously you have some online courses that you're doing. You used to be a football coach. I see a lot of other really great things about you. Why don't you give us just a brief rundown of who you are?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I've lived like 20 dog years, like work-wise. To your point, right? So I'm a Houston guy. I grew up very early on the south side of Houston, kind of, I guess, on the wrong side of the tracks. I mean, not necessarily, like crime impoverished, but definitely underserved. And, my parents kind of did the Fresh Prince thing, and like moved to the suburbs, and, just that move definitely changed the trajectory of opportunities that were provided to me. But if I'm honest, Bo, it also left a void of like a what if, right? And that what if, I think, has stayed with me, since then. And that what if is, without them making that change and changing educational systems, changing communities, what would I have become? And so, there are tons of beautiful minds and brilliant people that, didn't have that opportunity to move or just didn't want to, or just didn't. And so a lot of the philanthropic stuff that I do, I really serve not only the community that I grew up in early on, but I really try to focus on, kids and families who just don't have those opportunities. That doesn't mean that kid, that family is bad, negligent, lazy,
right,
criminal, any of those things.
Right.
And so growing up early, was just kind of a life overachiever. I played football at the University of Houston. And I think that's really, I did some in high school.
What initially got you into football? Were you just playing as a kid, or was your family football fans, Cowboy fans down there in Texas, I'm assuming?
Yeah. So here in Houston, there were Oilers fans, and then the Oilers left like when I was maybe like in middle school, high school.
Sure.
I played football because I was a really big athletic kid, and that's what you were supposed to do. My first love was actually basketball. So funny story. I was being recruited to a number of different schools for basketball, and I actually quit football my junior year in high school, and went to my coach and said, "Hey, I'm going to go lean out for basketball. I'm quitting football. I'm going to go run cross country." I had no idea, Bo, that the kids running around the school during football practice, I didn't know that that's what cross country. I didn't know that you were literally running across the country. I thought it was just like a sprint or something, right? So sure. I ran cross country for 2 weeks and came back to football. And so, the first thing I'll say is, education, one, athletics, two, has opened so many doors for me, and I'm so grateful, so thankful.
Sure.
It's a big reason why I advocate, no matter how good, what's your skill level, like play a sport. I mean, the discipline it teaches you, the life lessons it teaches, you don't have to play at the college level, you don't have to play at the high school level, but just find a sport to play. And so, playing definitely opened up doors for me.
Well, I think, especially for kids, it gives us a lot of tools that we need at that age. Discipline is probably number one on that. The other part is teamwork, working together as a team. All those things I think carry you further down the road. And so I'm always trying to, I have stepkids and I've always pushed them into sports. I think that it just gives you tools to success that sometimes are harder to gain in other areas.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think the other two lessons that sport teaches kids, one is conflict resolution, right? And
Absolutely.
So was the ball in or out? Was it a foul? Was it right? So, I mean, you have to figure those things out really in 30 to 60 seconds. Like, we've got to come to a resolve, right? And so I think the conflict resolution that it teaches kids, but then the other thing it teaches kids, I think that sport gives a kid an amazing self-reflection.
Yeah.
Right. So the kid who makes maybe the B team, that sport gives the kid an opportunity to say, hey, I'm not 18 material, but I can get better. I can improve.
Right.
Right. And so, I think that probably in the safest and most organic way, sport teaches a kid exactly where they are in their ecosystem.
Yeah. You definitely find your spot and where you fit in, don't you?
For sure.
Yeah. I played a lot of sports in high school and I loved it. It definitely gave me a area to put my energy into that was constructive rather than destructive. I know that kind of with your background, is that kind of what interested you into working with kids and becoming a coach? Was some of the things that shared with you in your youth, or what is it that really kind of drew you to coaching our youth and trying to make a difference?
I had, selfishly, I think I had the best coach that anybody could have. My position coach at the University of Houston was one of those educators that comes in a person's life like once every couple of moons, and you've got to be aware enough to gravitate.
Sure.
And so he was, I say educator, he was such a masterful, not just tactician at the game of football, but he was literally a life coach. And, as an adult, you understand the big business, the politics of college and pro sports. The staff end up getting fired, and, like most great things, great people, you kind of rise back to the top. So he got fired from the University of Houston, hopped around a couple of colleges, started as a tight ends coach for the Falcons, was a tight ends coach for the Chargers, actually won a Super Bowl with the Broncos with, I think it was maybe 2015, 2016 with Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
And he's now, I think, the run game coach of the O-line coach for the Bears. His name is Clancy Barone. And so, he planted that seed, not to coach, but to teach, right? So, I can teach you life through football better than I can teach you life through English.
Sure.
And so he was the first one. And then the second one I'd say is one of my mentor coaches. His name is Ray Seals. He's a Houston coach. He's in the Texas Coaches Hall of Fame. He was actually, I think, the 2013, 2014 NFL Coach of the Year. He coached Vince Young in high school, and he's probably coached a dozen NFL guys and too many college guys to count. And he gave me actually my very first coaching job. And I remember we were in the parking lot, kind of impromptu interview. And he asked me, he said, now, this is the final question. He said, which one is more important, for you to know a lot about football or for you to know a lot about kids? And, So, okay, I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's the pivot question in the interview.
Yeah.
And so I said, Coach, I don't know what the right answer is, but, to me, it's kids. And he said, I can teach you football. I can teach you any sport, any position. But to have the connectability and the desire to engage with people, let alone kids, you can't coach that.
Right.
And so that those two guys definitely, impacted me when it came to not just coaching football, but just connecting with people.
Yeah. And it's funny how life, I don't know if you're religious. I know that you are. That was a setup question. We'll get to that in a second. But I see that certain people come into our lives at certain times, and I honestly think it's a divine intervention of some sort, that God, places those people in your lives at the right times. And I know in my own life, I have a couple of my own angels, if you want to look at them like that have really influenced me and helped me to become the person that I am today. So I can connect with what you're saying on that, because I think whether it's within our family or external, at some point or another, there's that one or two or three people that will come into your life and completely change it in a way that you never expected, and it carries with you the rest of your life. So, props to those guys for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, tell me, you went to EW down in Houston. Obviously, we're playing in sports. What did you take in terms of classes? What was your interest?
So I think my biggest takeaway was, I didn't like to be labeled as an athlete. And I think that, that's a double-edged sword, right? So you may get an academic break because you're a football player and you're in your grades and, you're playing on Saturday night. Mm-hmm. You may get a tough break. There's a lot of people don't talk about. There are a lot of professors and a lot of, parts of the educational system that, aren't as supportive of athletics because of the history of the entitlement culture, right? And
sure.
So I just wanted to earn my grades based on my value. I wanted to impact my campus, my community. I was actually the president of 2 student organizations while I was a football player, and a lot of the people in those organizations didn't even know that I played football. Right? I kind of kept that much of a, of just kind of a distance away from those. I never wanted to be labeled as the dumb football guy.
It's that stigma, right? Because I'm a football player too. I'm built like a linebacker. And I always got fit into that box, especially when I was in football. A lot of people that are in sports have the mentality of, or not the mentality, but they have this preconceived notion that they're kind of a meathead, that they're all brawn, no brain kind of thing. And obviously you don't fit that mold at all, and neither did I. And I didn't like how, I don't know if this is why you kind of kept that secret to yourself, but I didn't like that niche that they tried to put me in, because I was so much more than that. And I feel like that's kind of how you were too. Am I right?
Yeah. So it's funny. My sophomore year, your athletic advisor tells you to declare a major, and, they're pushing all the sides on you, psychology, sociology, kinesiology, and I'm like, no, I kind of want to do, poli-sci, and they're like, no, that's way too rigorous of a, right? And so I end up, like, against their will, majoring in political science, or starting. So my goal as a college athlete or college student, I wanted to be a politician. I wanted to be a senator.
Okay.
Until I got a C in political science. So I get this C, and I'm like, oh, number one, this course is way more boring than I thought. And
Sure.
then my professor pulled me to the side and said, hey, what do you want to do? And I shared with him, and he's like, well, have you wrapped your head around going to law school? Have you wrapped your head around, these different barriers of entry. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I know that I want to create change.
Mm-hmm.
And, like this is, and so he did not discourage me. But he did, kind of make clear, like, this is what the pathway to the career that you want. And so I quickly changed my major to public speaking. And ironically enough, Bo, that same semester, and I didn't skip class often, but I skipped class, and I found myself sitting in a gallery, and the course that was going on was about philanthropy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what philanthropy was, but it attracted me, right? Mm-hmm. So not just giving money away, or the idea that you have to have a lot of money to be able to give it away, mm-hmm. but there is like an art and a science to, well-intended philanthropy and giving. Mm-hmm. And so I think that moment, that semester, is probably what cemented, my desire not only to build and scale business, but to be able to give back. And in addition to what we talked about earlier with, just my childhood and some of those experiences. And I hadn't connected those two moments until this conversation. But yeah, I mean, that was probably when I was beginning to figure it out.
Yeah. And it's the road that gets you to where you figured it out that I think is skipped over a lot. And that's one of the things that I try to tackle here. So I'm glad that we were able to make some of those connections, because it gives a different insight to people than what you would normally find on a face-to-face conversation kind of thing. And especially with people like yourself, you're a natural born leader, and it's inspiring, hopefully to our listeners that maybe feel the same way and try to figure out, well, how do I get there? I know I want to do this in life, but what do I need to do to get there? And so I think it's great, that for you, all of these things, between the people that kind of came in to help mentor you or coach you, all those things help shape you along this path that then really kind of broke out into, well, I'll put it into this way. You put it yourself, the story of the broke philanthropist. It does not matter if you're rich or poor. Sometimes the best thing that you can give is your time. And, it's all about community and the impacts that you make around you. At the end of the day, that's your legacy. It's not the money that you left behind for your kids or that monument that got built in your name. It's the difference in the community and the people that you meet around you. And so people like you make the world a better place. And so, I say thank you for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that, the only thing I'd add to that is, I think that there is especially today, I think there's such a need for whatever you have in your cupboard, mm-hmm. just bring it out.
Yeah.
Right. And so you think about like our grandparents, not our parents, but our grandparents, the people who lived through Black Friday and the Great Depression. And,
sure.
It really was about, Bo's got 5 eggs, I've got some flour, like we've got cornbread, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so like whatever talents, whatever gifts, whatever resources you have, I think that as a well-being of a country, like we need you, whoever you are, to give whatever you have to give for all of us to heal and move forward. And so, I mean, I think, to your point, it is, money does go a long way, but it's not the only talent. It's not the only treasure. It's not the only resource that people Absolutely. Can contribute to their community.
Absolutely. So I want to touch on a couple other things. One is you have a recipe that you kind of work by. Why don't you tell us about that? And how is it that you came up with that recipe, and how well is it working for you?
Yeah, so I came up with this recipe a few years back, and I'm still working on it, crafting it. And it was a step by step. And so, like many people, you have successes, you have setbacks. And I kind of have what I call my abyss. And so my abyss was the end of my high school coaching career. I transitioned out of coaching. I was able to accumulate a lot of wins in a relatively, short number of years. And I was called into the school leader's office and she said, "Hey, coach, we're loving what you're doing. You really help build the culture here. However, we're going to move your position into the counselor suite, and so you can stay and coach and coach PE, but like the athletic director role that we had as you have it is no longer." And it knocked me off my feet. It did, and so not primarily because I wasn't done, right? So I had done a lot of good work, but I wasn't done.
Sure.
More importantly, Bo, I wasn't in position to not have a job.
Right.
Right. Just in transparency, like, oh crap. And I could have stayed. I mean, I don't want to, play like woe is me. I could have taken an assistant job like the next day. I could have, probably secured a head coaching job before the next season. But, it was a push for me because, I don't like comfort. I don't like plausibility. I like to be challenged. And yes, coaching was a challenge. I'm not trying to say that there wasn't, but there was a point where I know that I needed to do more. And so, that was the beginning of my abyss. And I suffered a handful of personal setbacks and, I suffered some financial setbacks. But I mean, I had to sell my home to avoid it being foreclosed. My truck got repossessed. I mean, I had some really, really lonely moments in that time.
Well, those are the moments that try us, right? Those are our own personal trials, if you will. I think it's life testing us, God testing us, one of those two. But the way that you deal with it is speaks volumes of you. And so what you're telling us is that this was kind of a turning point that pushed you into going down the path that you're on now. Is that correct? Yeah, no,
they're the moments that try you and they're the moments that change you. And so, I'll be candid with you. I walked away from my faith. And it's not that God walked away from me. Like I walked away from him. I was just so disillusioned and I think so full of myself that I just was not able to wrap my head around why my perfect plan wasn't working. And so as I began to rebuild myself, and as a coach, right? So, you can beat me. You have a hard time beating me, but you're not going to beat me the same way twice.
Right.
And so I literally had to rebuild who I was, what I valued, how I spent my time, how I spent my money, how I learned, how I showed love, how I showed appreciation. And a part of that was forgiving myself and walking back into my faith. But another part of that was, remaining a lifelong learner. Mm-hmm. And, that's something that I fell in love with at a certain point in my life I walked away from. But the last piece and the missing piece and the most recent piece was stoicism. And so I found stoicism about a year and a half ago while I was writing my book, Win the First Quarter of Your Day. I had an interview with one of the character sketches in the book, and he turned me on to stoicism. And it's provided for me the balance of life, the balance of setback, the balance of success, especially during COVID, that I wouldn't have the tools, I wouldn't have the internal tools to deal with daily setbacks and daily successes, I think, without stoicism. Stoicism provides for me that base level to maintain and stops me from getting too low and guards me when I get too high.
So explain your understanding of stoicism. What does that mean to you? Because there's a couple different things that come to mind when I think of it. What does that mean to you?
So stoicism, I think, to your point, is relative to who, you talk to. I think each person has their own take on it. For me, it's a framework to approach decisions, and it's a framework to live by.
It's being able to endure that pain and hardship, right, without feeling or displaying those emotions with complaint, right?
Yeah, so there's a base layer of detachment to create awareness. Right. So the first piece is the detachment of emotion to create awareness. Bingo. Right. And the way I describe that is, when you go into the grocery store and you see, a pack of cookies for 10, 10, 10, then you see another pack of cookies and they're packaged different and they're 3 for $5 or whatever, right? So it's like, we know on the back end that Nabisco and whoever else has a price per unit, per ounce, per whatever for this pack of cookies. But as logical and emotionless as a man claims that he is, human beings are highly emotional creatures. So there's something that's going to emotionally trigger you to either gravitate towards the 10-10-10 cookies or the 3 for $5. No matter which one you trigger, that's 9 times out of 10 an emotional trigger.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to say, well, this is how I feel. Now let me put that aside and let me make a logical decision. And then, obviously figure out which one tastes the best or which one you prefer or which one has the better value or which one to get. Right. So however you make your decision, but essentially understanding that the first impact, the first response is to have an emotional response, and then put that aside and decide how to move afterwards. Ironically enough, was out today and was going for a bike ride and caught a flat today. And my first thought was, well, I'm glad I wasn't on the freeway. Like I was just leaving the neighborhood, not even a quarter mile from the house, and just right. And so instead of being angry, instead of being upset, instead of being overly anything, to me, Stoicism gives you the framework to say, one of the Epictetus quotes goes, I'm going to butcher it, but something like, if a man spills ketchup on his shirt, instead of being embarrassed, he can walk around with pride and say, at least now my colleagues know what a white shirt looks like with ketchup on it.
Right.
Right. So it's like that type of framework, takes the ego out. And it is a great book I would recommend for your audience. There's 2 actually. One is called Ego is the Enemy. And the second one is called The Obstacle is the Way. Both of them are written by Ryan Holiday, who is, I'd say, like our generation kind of leader, thought driver on Stoicism and how to apply it real time. So, saying all this to say, like, Stoicism for me has definitely provided me that baseline of humility, but also disposition to be able to make it through just the ups and downs of life.
Yeah. Gosh. Such a great tool that you've developed, because that's absolutely right. I always kind of equate it to mind, heart, and gut. My intelligence is located in my brain, but my heart and my gut tend to lead me off course sometimes, and sometimes I need to readjust my focal lens. Oftentimes we're zoomed in like a microscope, but if we just kind of bring back our perspective so that we include more of the macro and we see what's going on around us, and things become clear just by shifting that lens.
And that's so spot on, and it's so hard to do.
Bingo. Yeah, no, it's a tool, and it's one that I've worked on my whole life. The thing that I connect to about you is that you started early. You described to me with our email correspondence that you started your first hustle at 9. I also started really early, selling like day-old donuts at my school for, quarter to 50 cents, trying to make money. But I grew up really poor.
So that was 2 things for me. So the first was,
let me pick up there.
Oh, right. So, my first job, I'd say a first hustle, I call it. I used to tie a lawnmower to the back of my bicycle and just go around cutting my neighbor's grass. Would go door to door and, knock, and I don't remember how much, $5 or $10 I used to charge. And then I figured out that and I did okay with that. But then I figured out that if I cut the grass first and then asked for pay, that I was able to actually make a lot more money. So some folks, were like, hey, I didn't ask you to cut it. It's like, well, don't pay me.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I didn't ask you if I could cut it, but we're here. So,
right.
What do you want to do? So that was my first one. My parents were so supportive of just anything I wanted to do.
You have
and
a
I
pretty
wanted
good
to have
home
some
life,
money
huh?
in my pocket.
Well, good home
Yeah,
life,
well,
mom and dad.
Yeah, I had mom and dad, and I had my grandfather, who moved in with us. But there were a lot of things that I wanted that just weren't, that were amenities, I guess you could say,
Right.
in
Yeah.
a family operational budget.
Yep.
And I wasn't going to ask. And again, not ego, just you don't want to be in the way, or you just there was one night, and as an adult, I could have totally read this wrong. But there was one night I remember, my dad used to sell car salesman. I remember that my mom made pork chops and mashed potatoes, and I remember like she made 2 pork chops, and like she and I ate, and the food was gone, and I was like, well, damn, what's my dad gonna eat, right? And so, as an adult, he could have had, a dinner lined up, or could have had to close a deal, or, like she could have been mad at him. Who knows?
Right.
Right?
Yep.
But I just remember, like, there's 3 of us and there's 2 pork chops, and that picture stuck with me like so vividly that I was way too insecure to ask for anything.
Yeah.
And so so that was kind of my first hustle.
A little bit. So.
Yes, I was just sharing. Yeah, so my first hustle was, like in the 3rd grade or so, and it was, just because I wanted a few extra dollars in my pocket, not even that I had anything I wanted to do with it other than, not to hear either, my parents didn't have it, or, just to go get some junk food from the corner store or play video games. I was thinking back, it was probably Street Fighter 2. It was probably what led me to entrepreneurship. But, I just always had that bug. And so I had a paper route, I guess, at 12, 13, 14 or something like that. My parents got a paper route for me, and, legally. And I would just load up papers in my backpack and everything I could manage on my bike until it got big enough to where they'd have to take me overnight. We'd break down or pull together, assemble these newspapers and throw them in the community. And then I got suspended one time in high school. I used to have a backpack on my back with books and a backpack on my chest with candy, chips, and soda, and I would sell them for twice the price.
I did the same thing. That's so funny.
In between class. Yeah. You're too lazy to buy a 25-cent bag of chips and then buy a 50-cent bag of chips for me because they're right here.
Right. Price of convenience, right?
Exactly.
But when you're young, like I grew up an orphan. I was an orphan since I was 3. So I kind of drifted through the foster care system because I wasn't adopted out. And as a result of that, I was always limited on my income, and I had to be creative, just like you did, There's a bug that you said that kind of got into you. I see that some of us have that bug inherently, and some of us don't. And I know that you're kind of trying to help get that bug into other people. I know that you've been working on several things, but before we get to that, I wanted to also touch on Grown and Glory magazine.
Yeah. So Crown and Glory, well, I'll take a small step back. So the past 12 months, 2020, when COVID hit, obviously it's a devastating thing. But once for me, once I got past the initial, it is what it is, it opened my, like, this is such a great opportunity. So as a person who has had some success, but still striving for more, you look at a guy like, Tony Robbins, or, name your, speaker consultant.
Yeah.
And I literally both took it as a challenge and said, okay, well, if I'm locked down for 6 months, I bet you I can create better product, better content, better experience, better user experience in 6 months than Tony Robbins can in whatever mansion or castle he's sitting in. And again, this isn't to disrespect him,
right?
But we're on the same playing field. I'm in my house locked down. He's in his house locked down. Let's see who's more valuable to their community.
Mm-hmm.
And so I created Crown and Glory magazine really as a passion project. Um, I like, you know, high end luxury lifestyle stuff. And, I like to be inspired by those things. And so I created Crown and Glory. It's a digital magazine, and I call it um, a digital luxury lifestyle magazine. And so, I have three. Really, it's the three things that drive me and my business and my life, right? So my goal is to do three things: to inspire, advance, and evolve. And so that's kind of how the magazine is broken down. So it's a aesthetic based magazine, and so there's some commentary. And what I really do is I aggregate, great images, great topics, great thought pieces, great articles from different places. And so by no means I'm taking credit for creating.
You're kind of putting it into one area so that people can find it all, rather than having to go to all these different sources that you've actually done the time with.
And so what I found two things. So the first thing I found is we've had over 1,000 downloads in the 60 or 30 days, or about 45 days that it's been live.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing, both from a strategic, from a business standpoint, is, really, I think that so many times, and I'll be very transparent with you, when I first, began my entrepreneurial or really began to explode and go full steam, I was so attuned to playing it safe that my branding was safe, my imaging was safe, my content was safe. While it was quality, it was so vanilla that it didn't. Yeah. So what I found was, in this Crown and Glory magazine, I found two things. The first thing was, it's a passion project for me. So I'm a creative. I like, aesthetically pleasing things. I just like, like really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was kind of my way of getting out a little bit of creative energy. But we've had over 1,000 downloads. It's been less than 60 days that it's been live. And so that kind of ties into the second point. And this is a lesson I learned the hard way is, I tried so hard to fit in from a branding and content perspective for a number of years, that while my content was good and I got, really good feedback from it, and had some successes, it was so vanilla and so safe that it wouldn't move anybody. So just imagine like on Instagram, right? Just for as an example,
mm-hmm.
If you see a vanilla ice cream cone, you're not going to stop scrolling. You may say, vanilla ice cream, that's great. But if you were to see like, some 5-star Michelin restaurant version of a dessert, even if it's not quite for you, you're going to stop and look at it, right? And so that's what I did with Crown and Glory, was like, hey, if you like this magazine, then what I have to offer you is probably for you. And if it's not for you, then just keep on scrolling. No harm, no foul. But what it has turned into is an entry point into my kind of, omnipresent, or what I'm trying to build into an omnipresent content platform. And so, yes, if you like my magazine, then check out my book. Or if you like, the book, then you may like these videos on YouTube, or you may like this course release, right? So it becomes a pre-client lead gen unintentionally.
Mm-hmm. You, I think, are on track. I think this is what we need. And, not everybody fits Tony Robbins' bill. And so sometimes it takes someone from your social group, or your people that can relate to you, like my peers and your peers, and not all of us hang out with the same peers, and so if you have someone like Tony Robbins trying to preach to me, I'm not very receptive to that. For me, I'm more receptive to someone that's kind of laid back, just real, kind of like these conversations that we're having, they're not filtered through a lens of some advisor and what you're saying and what you're not saying, and you're just keeping it real. And even if we're reiterating what we've learned from other great people, we're still bringing it to people that might not necessarily be exposed to those people, because that's not who they are, And so for me, I try to bring it to some of my friends that they're too busy. They don't look at politics. They don't look at this. They don't look at that. And I try to break things down a little bit so that they're at least aware of some of what's going on. So I think that's what I'm hearing from you. Is that right?
What you said is so true. And I can say this, from a coaching perspective, there are very few schemes in any sport that are new.
Right.
like the Wildcat, when Tim Tebow was and Urban Meyer were running it to a science. The Wildcat offense actually isn't new. Now, we can give it a cool name and call these new positions, right? You can give it your own, you can make it, your own through intellectual property or the cool terms you call it. But, again, spending time with like my older coaching mentors, like, oh yeah, we ran that in the 70s.
Yeah.
All you're doing is cross training or cross developing a running back who can just barely make a couple of 7-yard drag throws, but you have to keep a safety on top to spy, which means, you can either pull that safety in and out of the box depending on what you want to do offensively. But yeah, like the Wildcat offense, the Wildcat offense made Tim Tebow, it made Cam Newton and about a half a dozen other guys. But the scheme itself, so yes, you're right. Like the ideas that we're talking about aren't new. They're just presented in a refreshed way,
right?
In an engaging way that a person can palate. You're absolutely right.
I think of it like religion a little bit. How many different types of Christianity are there? And each one tells it in a way that's receptive to that group, and they're all telling pretty much the same story and the same, biblical teachings, just in a way that's slightly different from one another. And I feel like this is kind of the same way. We just need to bring this into our own communities and bring this into our own groups and spread awareness. And we're, as a people, really divided, but at the same time, we're not. We're very connected. And I find that paradox, too, creates these pockets of thoughts, and it might occur regionally. It might be even within your state. You might have a different way of thinking north than you do in the south. It's just, we're all different, but we're all the same. And sometimes we need to just reiterate some of these things to people in a way that they're aware of, and it engages them, and that's hard to do with a lot of people these days. A lot of people are too busy, or they have, to look past their own backyard and kind of engage. But one of the things that I really like about the podcast aspect of things and what you're doing and people like yourself is we're causing people to engage. We're bringing in all these different things, which hopefully people find intriguing and engaging and thought-provoking. And then they hopefully then will incorporate some part of that in their own life and whatever they found positive and useful out of it. So,
yeah, that's really well said.
Yeah, I'm connecting with you because while we have some differences in our background, there's some things that you and I are both trying to do, and they're very similar in some ways, and to get people to engage and thought-provoke and not just take things for face value and become awakened, for lack of better words. And I think what you're doing now, because you went from, and I apologize for calling it Grown in Glory. It was a typo in your thing that you gave me. But for Crown and Glory, you have started with that. And then, if I'm not mistaken, you're also now, you've written one book. How many books? And I also know that you have the courses.
Yeah. So it started, and it was an itch, Bo. I worked mostly in the services business. And so the book I wrote released it last October, and that was the first product that I had ever, first time working in the product space.
What's the name of the book so people can find it?
Yeah, so the name of the book is Alpha Redefined, 12 Servant Leadership Principles of Legendary Leaders. It can be found on alpharedefined.com, or it's also housed digitally on Coach Cam courses. And so you can grab the physical copy on alpharedefined.com or the digital copy on Coach Cam courses. And in the essence of that book, I've been called an alpha like all my life. You know, you're big, you're strappy, you know how to get money, you know how to get girls, or, you know, like whatever, whatever definition of an alpha other people place on you. And I began to really resent, you know, being called an alpha. And it wasn't until, you know, someone sat me down and said, well, do you actually know what an alpha is? And I was like, yeah, like they're rich, they get what they want, they drive the biggest car, they're, you know, they peacock, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the person was like, yeah, that is not what an alpha, like you should look into that. So I began to, you know, build out these servant leadership principles. And, you know, just the way I learn, I'm a big history. I love history so much. You learn so much from the past.
Oh, yeah.
And so what I did with the book was I married a servant leadership principle to a different person in time. Like some people being like in real time, like J.J. Watt, like Oprah, like a handful of other people. But I also, you know, went back in time and did character sketches on FDR, right? I did character sketch on Mahatma Gandhi. And so the idea is, you know, being physically dominant like Muhammad Ali doesn't make you an alpha. Like an alphas come in all shapes and sizes, mm-hmm. right? So the whole idea is leading and serving and providing for others. And so, yeah, so I wrote that book in October, released it in October. And then I started on the course, Win the First Quarter of Your Day, in January, before COVID. In fact, I was set to film, they call it Black Friday. So I was set to film, I think it was March 13th, when, you know, like everything shut down. Mm-hmm. And so I had to film it, like, you know, I filmed it myself at my house. But yeah, so kind of going back to the point I was making earlier, like, yes, you know, during COVID, I, you know, wrote a script, filmed it, created a magazine, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, so it does kind of become, as an athlete, as a competitor, you know, what are we producing to make, not from a corporate standpoint, like to make the most dollars, but, you know, what are you doing to make the world better than how you found it?
Bingo. Yeah. You know, so let me ask you this. We know your history a little bit, but that bug, that determination to apply yourself, right? Whether that's reading and learning and history so that it gives you a more well-rounded outlook of things. Not all of us have it. I have read thousands of books. I know you yourself read quite a bit. I think you're on track this year. I think you had wrote me for 52. Is that correct? 52 books this year?
Yeah. Trying to get to a book a week. I'm like a week or two off, mostly due to COVID. But yeah, sure. I'll end the year with 52 under my belt.
So what gives people like you and I that drive? So many people are just complacent with where they're at, and I try to encourage and spread that fire just like you are. But is it genetic? Is it a result of how you grew up? What do you look at and see through that?
So I'll answer that this way. I have this case study that I want to execute so bad. Like this is one of my like bucket list things, right? Mm-hmm. Now I don't have the science to prove it, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. So what I want to find a small city or a small county, and I want to run a social experiment. I believe that we could eradicate homelessness in 18 months in a small sample city, you know, small town or suburb or something like that. Mm-hmm. So the idea is this: the guy who fries at Whataburger or Chick-fil-A or, you know, McDonald's, he could probably be working the cash register if he tried a little bit harder. If he worked on his weaknesses, maybe he's not good at math.
Sure.
The person who works the cash register may be manager material, right? So maybe they have the math skills if they worked on maybe their soft skills, their emotional intelligence, or their leadership skills.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably assistant manager or a store manager that's running a Starbucks or running a Chick-fil-A that probably just needs a little bit of money, and they can go start their own mom and pop coffee shop.
Right.
Right. And so the idea is if we push up the ring, that there's an open vacancy at the bottom. So if that fry cook turns into a cashier, that cashier turns into a manager, and that manager turns into a branch operator, and that branch operator turns into a, creates a chain of them, or, has a portfolio of smaller restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
Then now there's an opening for the fry cook.
Right.
So that person that was homeless or that person that was disenfranchised or didn't have an opportunity can now climb on the ladder. And so I think to answer your question, and it sounds Pollyanna, but I mean, I do think that that's what makes America so dope is it was founded. So you think about the idea that the framers of the Constitution, when there is no cell phones, there's no technology, zero technology,
mm-hmm.
found a way to unanimously convene in Philadelphia at a season when we needed the smartest, brightest people. And so, I'm a big I think Benjamin Franklin is the most underrated rock star like in American history.
Oh, he was definitely a rock star with all the girls.
Man, like Benjamin Franklin would have his own reality show today.
All I know is he had a good time when he went to Paris or when he went to spend time in France.
Right. And so the idea is it's easy to think that the framers were really smart,
right,
and the universe aligned them. The fact of the matter is you had to bust your ass back then.
Right.
And so they were, I'm sure, like today, highly intelligent people everywhere. It's just, technology to the point early in our conversation has set such a low on us that it's easy to go on to sleep mode or airplane mode and just kind of piddle through your day. So when in order for us to advance, we've got to move forward.
So you're saying that technology has kind of helped make people sheeple. That's I
think so.
I love that expression,
yeah.
sheeple.
There's a book. There's a book 0 to 1. Peter Thiel wrote it. He's one of the guys from PayPal Mafia, and he makes one of his theses in the book is, and he's obviously a tech guy, right? But technology has slowed now. Technology is slower now than it's ever been. And the example he uses is, 200 years ago, you drove a horse, and then the innovation of a carriage, and then the innovation of a car. And then, right, so it's like there are just like humongous steps in innovation and technology and thought.
Right.
Well, 30 years ago, you thought of a cell phone. And 30 years ago, cell phones were around. Right? So it's like, so while the innovation has come, it's really cool over the last 30 years, have we truly innovated the way that we claim or we like to think that we have? And the answer is probably not, because we should, if that were true, we'd be closer to the Jetsons, flying autonomous safe cars versus, autonomous cars not even being yet.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is sometimes technology, it's designed to speed us up, but sometimes it slows us down.
It's a great perspective in a way that I actually hadn't thought of that before. I think you're right. I think that to a certain extent, I think there's probably several reasons why people have turned sheeplish, but I think that you're right. For as much as the advances have come, we're not made to bust our butts like we used to back in the day and apply ourselves. The idea of poverty, some of it is, I think people just get used to it. We accept it, and some of that acceptance then leads to sheepalism, if you will. And people just give up and they stop trying. And I like what you're doing because it's inspiring and it's thought-provoking and it's giving people tools. So tell us about the courses that you're doing and tell us about the tour and all that. I want to be able to get you plugged and make sure that people can find you and join up and get these tools themselves.
Yeah, no, for sure. So after we released the book, I did a like 6-city promo tour, and was in either Irvine or I was in California, sure. And I kept getting these same couple of questions. As a podcaster, I know you can relate to this. Like, guys, like let's mix it up like a little bit, right?
Right.
So at the end of, like a reading or a book signing, I would, kind of open up Q&A, and I would get this one question. It would start with, how do you do so much? Or how do you get so much stuff done in a day? Right. So you wrote this book, you focus on philanthropy, you have a sports construction company, you travel to speak, you obviously have family. How do you get all this stuff done? Mm-hmm. And my answer was the same, but something about that California stuff, it like stuck with me. And I said, I win the first quarter of my day. I wake up at 4:00 in the morning. I have a pretty consistent routine that includes, just kind of anchored items. I spend time with God. I spend time in meditation. I work out, get something to eat. But just, more than that, like
it's structure.
It's structure, and like my morning routine ensures that I have success the rest of my day.
Right.
And so, I began to kind of take some consultation calls and some one-on-ones, and you know how it is. Like it becomes, you look up the mountain, it becomes intimidating. Like, yes, I want to help as many people as I can. I want to impact. I want to thought provoke. I want to challenge. Like I can't. There's only one of me, right? So it's okay. Well, how do I repurpose this so I can get this message out? So I can get this thought, this idea out at an infinite scale. And so the idea kind of came like, you know what? You can take this outline, this philosophy, these principles, and add some to them. And I had quite a bit of research in preparation for the book, of just interviews of different people, and some of what I would ask them is like, what are your routines and kind of what are your kind of rock solid go-tos, and revisited some of those conversations, and we ended up with the curriculum for the course. And so so the course is Win the First Quarter of Your Day, a playbook for wealth, health, and success. And so it goes by, if you follow this schematic, from 4:00 in the morning to 8:00 in the morning, if you follow it, I think leads you to have a very, very, very successful day within a more purposeful and productive life.
I would agree with that. I try to maintain structure in my life too. Having a routine that you're applying yourself in. For instance, you meditate and spend time with God. That's obviously very important and part of your day. You do your workout. You have probably put aside time for family because that's obviously super important. But you've structured it so that you're able to tackle what you're tackling without necessarily being overwhelmed. A lot of people procrastinate and they try to get it all done at once. You can't do that when you have a structure. It is chiseling out time each day to keep yourself well-balanced and well-rounded, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that, so two thoughts on that. The first thing is, one of the first things that you learn in coaching is, the best way to win a game is to have the lead at the end of the fourth quarter. The best way to have the lead at the end of the fourth is to have the lead at the end of the third.
Right.
The best way to have the lead at the end of the third is to have right. So like if you're winning at the beginning of the first quarter, you got a really good chance. I don't have the stats on me, but you got a really good chance of winning that game. In fact, the outliers are the ones we remember, right? They were up by 20. How could they lose? Like, those are the ones that we remember. Mm-hmm. We forget the ones where they were up by 20 and they won.
Right.
right? And so just again using such a simplistic approach, if you can win the first 4 hours of your day, you're setting yourself up to have a ton of success. And so, the other thought off of that is one of the modules we talk about is recalibrate, right? And so you're home from the gym or whatever kind of physical activity. Again, you don't have to pump a bunch of iron or, whatever physical activity is for you. We kind of outline some of that in the course, but you've had that time and now you're beginning to recalibrate. You're coming down. That's the best time for you to learn, right? You're open, your body, you've got some body movement, you're feeling pretty good. So one of the principles we talk about is recalibrate to stimulate, right? And so to recalibrate or get your body, get your thoughts, get your mind back, on a solid wavelength, to then stimulate what you're going to do moving forward throughout that day. And so to your point, instead of getting caught up, you remember when Tetris first came out,
mm-hmm.
the last block in the game is not the one that knocks you out. That's the one that makes the game over. Most times it's that foundational, the way you set that foundation, that's what sets you up for success in Tetris. Well, it's the same thing here.
Right.
So setting yourself up to be successful.
Every successful person I know has structure in their life and a routine that they follow in order to lead them to success. I don't think success is, you might have a very small percentage that it's all luck, but for the most part, that doesn't exist. It's something that you set up in your life via the tools that you're giving us with this podcast and in your courses in the book, that are going to enable us to be winners. And I think one of the things that I want to end with, that I think you can really give us some insight on, is fear. I think people are afraid sometimes to take those steps to change or make change in their life. What can you give us regarding mastering fear?
It's so funny that you mentioned it. One of the products that we're looking at, or one of the challenges of how to tackle, is fear. I think that so many times people are looking for an antibody for fear, when the fact of the matter is fear doesn't go away, right? It's learning how to control that fear. We shared a bit of my kind of playing background earlier in our conversation. I didn't play youth sports. The first time I played organized sports was middle school, right? So you got to wrap your head around, the fear of performance in front of 150 people,
right,
in middle school, right? But if you have the advantage of playing youth sports, it's just maybe 30 or a couple, everybody's mom and dad or whatever, 30 people in
mm-hmm.
in youth sports. Well, if you struggle with performance in front of an audience at 150 in middle school, in Texas, the stadium that's close to me, the high school stadium, holds 17,000 people.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah.
Can you perform in front of 17,000? Okay, yes. Okay, well, you get an offer to Alabama, you're playing in Tuscaloosa, and there's 108,000. Can you perform in front of 108,000? The answer, really, the fear doesn't go away.
Right.
It's building up a tolerance to the fear that gives you the stamina to go further. Like I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with fear. I struggle with doubt. And again, the recipe we talked about earlier is an amazing, kind of shot in the arm for that. But the fact of the matter is, but I was also concerned about performing in front of 150 people 20 years ago.
Right. Well,
right? So
what it reminds me of is it's a desensitization to whatever it is that's triggering your fear, right? So, for instance, if you started out in youth and you're playing with 30 parents and then that progresses to high school and it's 150, and now it's college and it's 100 and some thousand. It's a progressive desensitization to the amount or that volume. And I think of it a lot like public speaking too. before I could ever do something like this, I used to have the worst stage fright. Oh my gosh, I could not talk in front of large groups of people. I had a issue listening to my own voice as it was played back to me. Those are the things that I had to get over in order to do what I'm doing now. And a lot of it, I think, was putting one foot in front of the other, having faith in yourself that you can do it and at least explore it. And part of anything that you start out with, it's like creating a baby. I look at companies as kind of like that. You start out with this idea, and then it tends to grow into what it grows into. And you can nurture it and make it grow healthy and successful, or you can neglect it and it doesn't grow very well. So yeah, I relate to that part of what you're saying. And all of us feel fear. It's being able to master, say, all right, I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to do this. And especially with sports and you're on a field, you're focused in on the field. I think whatever it is that you're doing that's causing fear, just focus on what you're doing and try to ignore or push aside some of that fear. And eventually, if you keep doing it, it's desensitizing you to the fear, and eventually it won't be a problem at all. What do you think?
And the piece I'd add to the back end of that is once you have conquered whatever, again, in our analogy, you've played in front of the first middle school crowd of 150 people, and you did it. You performed well. You won the game. You had a good performance. The next week, that fear comes back, right? Mm-hmm. However, because you've conquered it, now that fear is a choice.
Right.
And I can choose to be overcome by that fear, or I can choose to turn that fear off. And again, I don't want to make it sound easier or, like I struggle, it's a lifelong chess match, fear.
Like that too.
But,
yep.
But the more wins you have, the more you realize that it's only as big or it's only as much of a threat as you allow it to be.
Exactly. Anything that you want to tell us, give us, before we leave ways here? I really appreciate the time that you took with me today. I apologize for the technical issues that we were having, but I think what we've discussed and what we've went over resonates, at least in me, and hopefully some of our other listeners as well. I'm definitely going to be leaving links to find you within the podcast description. You'll be able to find Coach Cam. You'll be able to find his online courses and links to his book. Would really like to talk to you down the road as you develop this, maybe in a year or so, and just touch base and look at your own growth as because you put some time into this, but this is still an infant, and I see this hopefully exploding, and this will really take off for you.
No, thanks, Bo, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I think that if this COVID season has taught us nothing, it's patience is relative, right? And so I think a year ago, you may have been too busy, I may have been too busy, we may have been too short-tempered to continue this valuable conversation.
Sure.
COVID's made things beautifully simple. So
amen.
You're having a good conversation. Pick up the phone and finish the conversation.
Yeah.
The last thing that I leave with is we get to design our lives, and we get to decide how much stress we deal with. We get to decide how much pressure we deal with. We get to decide how much time off, that we deal with. And so, as an athlete, as a coach, I don't do self-pity too well. I'm a very empathetic person, but the person who's, I'm working doubles, well, stop.
Right.
Like you don't have to do that. Now, again, there's trade-offs, right? So maybe you've got to, downgrade your car or downgrade a certain part of your life. But if we can be intentional about how we design our lives, and I think that I like to connect that back into, my abyss, right? So when I went through, that dark time of my life, I made the decision to redesign my life, and the things that are important to me need to be reflected in in the way I spend my time, the way I spend my resources. But more importantly, you can be literally whatever you choose to be. And that is, as cliche and, like kind of sit on uncle's lap as that sounds, it's true. And so if you want to finish your degree, if you want to go to law school, if you want to be a chef, like there's nothing that a person can't learn. Mm-hmm. Now that you may have to take that learning block and break it down into sub blocks, right, to get there. Mm-hmm. But you can be whatever you choose to be. And so if you're in the middle of COVID and you're stressed and you're overworked and you're making poor decisions and choices, you can fix that.
Right.
You can fix that and turn yourself into a completely different person by the time COVID is over and we're able to, commune and spend time with each other.
I like to think of it as explore and find your potential. Each one of us has our own unique gifts and things that maybe you or I don't have. We're all made different. And if we just explore our strengths, know our weaknesses, and know thyself, it's amazing where you can go after you know who you are and what tools you have that you're working with. There's also things in life, I think, that you develop that you never expected. You never expected to learn this or that or be exposed to this or that. And by doing so, that creates its own tools and learning experiences. But, at the end of the day, life is a journey, and it's about, living life to your fullest or our fullest. And, it's exploring who we are and exploring that potential and making the most of it. Because, life is a gift, and I'm just inspired, and I think that hopefully other listeners that we had on this podcast will be inspired as well. So I want to thank you. Yeah. I think that, what your track record is showing who you are as a person, and what you've done, each thing is growing on itself, which is how life works. It's all part of that personal growth. It grows on what you learned yesterday, and it continues to build. So for some people, life is a constant lesson if you let it be. It'll teach you things that, society just doesn't have in books. There's a certain amount of experience to life that only life will give you. So yeah, I encourage everyone listening, explore your potential, and conquer your fears, and explore the tools like what Coach Cam has to offer to get you there. And with that said, thank you very much for coming on our podcast today, Mr. Cameron.
Hey, Bo, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate, your wise words, and I wish you the best in this journey.
Same here. You have yourself a great day. And like I said, reach out to me in like a year. I'd like to follow up and see how you're doing.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Let's do this again sometime.
Sounds great. You have yourself a great day.
Thanks, you too.
All right, bye now. What a great podcast, Mr. Coach Cameron, inspiring us to be all we can be and giving us the tools to get there. Some of the things that we brought up in our podcast today are things that I at one time learned before today, but it was the learning experience of it was not structured. It was learning by life's trials and tribulations. If you get ahead of the game and get Coach's course and apply that to yourself, or even just work on finding your potential. And once you find it, once you find the things that you're good at, once you find what your strengths and weaknesses are, you can tackle life in a way that you've never been able to do before. So I encourage you all to be all you can be, and take a look at our description for Coach Cameron's courses, and maybe you can pick up some tools there to help you on your journey. You guys have a great day.